They did not drag Caleb into the Florida swamp because they believed he was weak. They dragged him there because for one dangerous second, he had shown everyone on Holloway Plantation that he was not afraid of them, and that was the crime no master could forgive. Jefferson County, Florida, August 1859. Before sunrise, before the fields took heat, before the White House opened its shutters, Caleb was already carrying timber. Wet oak, 200 pounds across his shoulders, bare feet on roots, mud, stone, the same path he had walked for 9 years. Long enough for the plantation to mistake his endurance for obedience. Long enough for men like Edward Holloway to believe a black man's silence meant consent. It did not. Caleb worked the timberline on the west edge of Holloway Plantation, where the pine woods began to thin toward the cypress swamp. He was valued for his back, his hands, his silence. In Holloway's ledgers, that silence had a price, $900, strong timber worker, reliable, productive. That was how the plantation wrote a man down, not by his grief, not by his memory, not by the child who watched him from the clearing, but by the market value of his body. That morning, Caleb Jr. stood near the tree line, 16 years old, still carrying the softness of a boy in his hands, but not in his eyes. The plantation had already started aging him from the inside. He did not call out loudly, "Reed's coming." That was all he had to say. Overseer Thomas Reed rode out from the pines on a mare, though the distance was short enough to walk. Men like Reed preferred height. A horse gave him a throne, even in mud. He was a compact white man with rust-colored whiskers and small, flat eyes. He did not shout when he approached. That was part of his cruelty. Rage would have made him seem human. Reed preferred calm. Calm made punishment look like procedure. He stopped in front of Caleb Jr. "You were 3 pounds short last night." The boy lowered his eyes. "Sir, That wasn't a question." Reed dismounted slowly. He unhooked the short whip from his belt. Not the long one used for cattle, the short one, braided, weighted, made for close work. The first strike landed across the boy's shoulder. No one moved. The second caught his back. Axes stopped mid-swing. Men froze in the clearing, not because they did not care, but because the plantation had taught them the terrible arithmetic of survival. One man punished could become 3. One witness could become another target. Caleb watched. The third blow came down, then the fourth. Caleb set down his axe. "Enough!" The word did not sound large. It was not shouted. It did not need to be. In that clearing, it landed harder than any weapon Reed carried. The plantation heard it. Reed turned. "What did you say?" Caleb stepped forward. His face did not change. "The boy weighed right. The South Barn scale runs 3 pounds low. I checked it myself." The statement was true. That was the first thing the plantation could not forgive. The second was that Caleb said it in front of others. Reed raised the whip. Caleb caught his wrist. There was no struggle. That was what made it worse. Caleb did not twist Reed's arm. He did not throw him down. He simply stopped him. For 3 seconds, every person in the clearing saw the truth. The plantation spent all its money trying to hide. Reed's power was not natural. It was arranged. It depended on horses, weapons, ledgers, patrols, laws written by men who feared exactly this moment. Caleb held his wrist, then let go. Reed stepped back, picked up the whip, returned it to his belt. Mounted his horse. He did not threaten Caleb. He did not promise punishment. He rode away quietly. That was how Caleb knew the matter had gone beyond anger. Anger speaks. Power makes arrangements. By noon, Caleb understood they would come before dark. He kept working, log after log, stroke after stroke. He knew men were watching him and looking away, not from betrayal, from fear. The plantation had trained fear into them with care. It had made distance feel like wisdom. Caleb did not blame them. He had once known how to look away, too. An hour before sunset, 4 men came for him, 2 of Reed's white hands. 2 black men from the plantation, Sam and Clay, ordered into the work of delivering him. They would not meet his eyes. "Master wants you." Caleb walked ahead of them, not because he could not fight. Everyone there knew he could. That was why 4 men had been sent. He walked because resistance in that moment would not fall only on him. It would fall on Junior, on Moses, on Celia, on every person whose name Holloway could turn into a lesson. That was another truth the plantation depended on. It chained people together, then punished love as weakness. Edward Holloway received Caleb on the veranda. The sun had lowered over the cotton fields, turning them copper. Holloway stood in a pressed coat with silver hair and a glass of bourbon beside him. He looked like a man who had never been corrected by consequence. Reed stood behind him, not beside him, behind him. That detail mattered. Reed was the hand. Holloway was the system that allowed the hand to close. Holloway studied Caleb for a long moment, the way a man studies damaged property. "You put your hands on my man." I stopped his arm. "Same thing on this property." There it was, the confession. Not hidden, not dressed up. On Holloway Plantation, stopping cruelty was treated as theft. A black man protecting a boy was considered an offense against ownership. Holloway lifted his glass, drank, and set it down. $900, he said. "That is what you cost me, roughly at current market." Caleb said nothing. That silence deserves to be remembered, not because silence is submission, but because in rooms like that, every word was weighed against the violence waiting behind it. Caleb gave Holloway nothing extra to use. Holloway continued, "Reed wants you hanged. I overruled him. Hanging is a waste of capital." He said it plainly. As though discussing whether, as though deciding whether to repair a fence. Then he added the line that revealed him completely. "I have always found the natural world a more elegant solution than rope." There was no mercy in that sentence, only accounting. Holloway turned toward the doorway. "Take him into the swamp, past the second cypress break, where the ground turns soft." He paused. "Don't hurry back." They bound Caleb's wrists behind him. They hobbled his ankles close enough for short steps. Then they took him west, into the dark. 4 horses, no lanterns. The pine woods thinned. The ground changed under his feet, sand, then clay, then black peat that swallowed each step and released it, warm, wet, and slow. The air grew heavier, warmer, rotten with still water and living things. Caleb watched everything. The angle of the stars, the bend of the trail, the sound of night birds. He did not know yet which detail would matter, only that a man being taken to his death had no right to waste information. The cypress swamp opened before them like a drowned cathedral. Trees rose from black water, moss hung in long gray curtains, roots pushed up like bones. Somewhere deeper in the dark, an animal called once and stopped. Reed dismounted. He came close enough for Caleb to smell tobacco and leather. "Nobody comes out of this part," Reed said. "Not on their own." Caleb looked at him. "You've been afraid of me since this morning," he said. "That's why there are 4 of you." Reed hit him. Caleb's head turned with the blow. Then he brought it back and looked at Reed again. That was the part Reed could not break. "Put him in." They shoved Caleb into the water. It closed over him warm and thick. Not like a river, not like clean current. This water held heat like sickness. Bound at the wrists, he rolled onto his back and broke the surface. On the bank, the horses turned away. Hooves faded, then nothing. Caleb floated in the dark, hands tied behind him, face aching, legs heavy, and the swamp listening. To his left, 2 ridges cut the water. Eyes. An alligator watched him without urgency. Caleb did not splash. He did not panic. Panic was a language in that water, and every predator understood it. He moved slowly in the opposite direction until his legs found a cypress knee. He hooked himself against it and began working the rope at his wrists against the bark. One scrape, then another. 20 minutes. Skin tore. Rope frayed. Blood ran into the water. Then the binding gave. Caleb freed his ankles and stood on the root, surrounded by darkness in every direction. This was supposed to be the end of him. But the record must show what Holloway did not understand. The swamp was dangerous. Yes, but danger is not loyalty. And by throwing Caleb into that water, Holloway had delivered him to the one place on earth that did not recognize Edward Holloway's name. Caleb breathed in. Then he began to listen, really listen. Frogs in layers, insects like a wall of iron sound. Water dripping from moss, something large moving north, something small breaking the surface nearby. A bird calling from the east, 3 notes. A pause, 3 notes again. Caleb turned his head. East meant higher ground meant survival. He stepped down into the water, slow, testing the bottom before shifting his weight. He was not fighting the swamp now, he was asking it questions, and for the first time that night, it began to answer. Before midnight, Caleb found a small raised hammock, 6 feet of solid ground wrapped in ferns. Invisible unless a man knew where to look. He pulled himself onto it and sat with his back against a cypress trunk. His wrists bled, his face throbbed, his body shook from cold and exhaustion. But he was alive. That is the fact Holloway's plantation did not plan for. A black man they had priced, bound, struck, and thrown away was still breathing in the dark. And breathing, sometimes, is the first act of rebellion history bothers to record. If you're listening from Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, or anywhere this buried history still reaches you, comment your location below. And tell us this: when Caleb said, "Enough," was that the moment he doomed himself? Or the moment he finally became free? Edward Holloway did not need to raise his voice. That was part of the machinery. On plantations like his, authority often spoke softly because it had already arranged the violence in advance. The shouting belonged to overseers, patrolmen, and frightened hired hands. Men like Holloway gave orders from chairs, verandas, office desks, courthouse steps. They did not have to dirty their sleeves for cruelty to carry their name. Caleb stood before him at sunset with his wrists still free, though everyone on that veranda knew the decision had already been made. The fields behind him were quieting for the evening. Workers moved in low lines toward the quarters. Cooking fires would soon begin. Children would be counted. Doors would close. The plantation would pretend it had returned to order, but it had not. That morning, Caleb had stopped Thomas Reed's arm in front of witnesses, not struck him, not attacked him, simply stopped him, and that was enough. In Holloway's world, the act itself was not the danger. The danger was that others had seen it. A black man had shown that the overseer's power could be interrupted. That fact had to be buried before it spread. Holloway turned the glass of bourbon once in his hand. "You put your hands on my man." Caleb kept his eyes level. I stopped his arm. Holloway's face did not change. "Same thing on this property." That sentence deserves to be held in evidence. Same thing. To stop a beating was to commit an offense. To protect a boy was to challenge ownership. To prove the scale was false was to disturb the larger lie that held the plantation together. Thomas Reed stood behind Holloway, one step to the right. His cheek was tight. His pride had been damaged, and men like Reed mistook damaged pride for injury. "He should hang," Reed said. Holloway did not look back at him. "No." For a moment, someone standing nearby might have mistaken that word for restraint. It was not. Holloway was not defending Caleb's life. He was protecting an investment. $900, Holloway said. That is what he costs, roughly. Strong timber worker. 8 years of reliable service, maybe more. He spoke as if Caleb were not standing 6 feet away. That was the method. Reduce the person first, then the harm becomes easier to authorize. Holloway set down the glass. Hanging is public, he said. Public things make stories. Stories make men careless. Reed's eyes shifted. Holloway continued, calm and exact. The swamp will do what rope does, without witnesses, without questions. There it was. Not anger, not impulse. A plan. This is where the record must accuse him plainly. Edward Holloway chose the swamp because he wanted Caleb gone and the plantation quiet. He wanted no grave to visit, no body to explain, no spectacle that could turn an enslaved man into a warning in the wrong direction. He wanted disappearance. He wanted nature to sign the crime for him. He looked toward the dark line of cypress beyond the western fields. Take him past the second break, he said, where the ground turned soft. Reed waited. Holloway added, do not hurry back. Those words were the sentence. Not written, not filed, not judged by any court that would have mattered, but a sentence all the same. 2 white hands came from the yard. Sam and Clay were ordered forward too. Both were black men from the plantation, forced into the work of carrying out another man's cruelty. Sam kept his eyes low. Clay's jaw moved once as if he were chewing down words he could not afford to speak. This, too, was part of the system's design. It made the trapped participate in the trapping. It turned survival into compromise, then judged the compromised for surviving. Reed bound Caleb's wrists behind him, tight, not fast, but careful. Reed wanted the rope to speak before the swamp did. Caleb did not resist. He looked once toward the quarters. Far off, Caleb Jr. stood between 2 cabins, his shoulders stiff under his torn shirt. Even from that distance, the boy understood enough. Caleb gave him nothing dramatic. No farewell, no raised hand, no speech, only a look. Hold, that was all it said. Then they moved west, 4 horses, 1 prisoner. No lanterns. The last light faded behind them as the plantation road narrowed into a work trail. Pine needles softened the ground. Branches scraped its sleeves and saddle leather. Reed rode ahead, his back straight, performing calm for the men behind him. The deeper they went, the less the land resembled Holloway's property. That was the first irony. Holloway believed the swamp was an extension of his command because it touched his land. But ownership lines drawn in ledgers meant nothing to water, roots, snakes, fever, mud, or night. The courthouse could call it property. The swamp did not answer to paper. Caleb walked in short steps, ankles hobbled. Each movement had to be measured. He watched the trail because watching was still something they had not taken from him. A broken pine leaning north. A dead branch shaped like a hook. A patch of pale fungus glowing on a stump. A narrow ditch where rainwater had cut through clay. He stored each detail, not because he had hope in any clean, easy sense. Hope was too soft a word for what he carried. What he carried was attention. Attention is what remains when choice has been stripped away. The ground changed under his feet. Sand gave way to damp clay. Clay gave way to black peat. The air thickened. Mosquitoes gathered. The smell shifted from cut timber and field smoke to stagnant water, leaf rot, and the sour breath of hidden life. One of the horses resisted. Reed pulled the reins hard. Move! The animal stepped forward, but unwillingly. It knew what men often refuse to know. There are places where confidence is not intelligence. They reached the first cypress break after nightfall. The trees rose from pooled darkness. Their roots did not sit on the ground. They gripped it, broke it, vanished into it. Moss hung low enough to brush a man's face. The path became less certain. The men behind Caleb grew quieter. Not respectful, afraid. There is a kind of fear white power never wanted named. Fear of the land beyond cleared fields. Fear of darkness not controlled by lamps. Fear of places where the rules had not been written by them. On the plantation, Reed could decide who moved, who ate, who suffered. In the swamp, his voice traveled only a few feet before the insects swallowed it. They crossed the second cypress break. The water began in patches at first. Shallow pools between roots, then wider stretches of black surface reflecting broken stars. Caleb felt mud pull at his feet with every step. The hobbles made it worse. He stumbled once, but did not fall. Reed turned in the saddle. "Still walking?" Caleb did not answer. The silence angered Reed more than words would have. At last, the trail ended. Not became difficult. Ended. Ahead was water, still black and wide enough that the far side disappeared into tree shadows. Cypress trunks rose from it in columns. Knees pushed up through the surface like buried hands. The men stopped. No one needed to ask if this was the place. Reed dismounted. The others stayed mounted. That detail exposes them. They had come far enough to obey Holloway, but not far enough to share Reed's pride. Reed stepped close to Caleb. "Nobody comes out of here," he said. His voice was quiet again. He had recovered some of the tone he used in the clearing. But now it had strain beneath it. "Not alone, not tied, not after dark." He waited, perhaps expecting pleading. Caleb gave him none. Reed looked past him at the water. Gators, moccasins, sinkholes, fever if nothing else gets you. Then he leaned nearer. "I want you to understand something. This is not a story. No one is coming. No one is watching. No one will remember this right." That was the plantation speaking through him. It was not enough to harm a man. They wanted control over the memory of the harm. They wanted Caleb to disappear so completely that his absence could be folded into rumor. Ran away. Lost. Taken by the swamp. Unfortunate. Unknown. History is full of words chosen to make crimes sound like weather. Caleb looked at Reed. "You've been afraid since morning." Reed's mouth tightened. "That why there are 4 of you." The blow came fast. A closed fist across Caleb's face, hard enough to turn his head, hard enough to make Sam look away, hard enough for Clay to shift in the saddle and then force himself still. Caleb brought his face back slowly. He did not spit. He did not curse. He simply looked at Reed again. That look was the last thing Reed wanted to carry back with him. "Put him in," Reed said. Sam and Clay hesitated. Reed turned on them. "Now." They stepped forward. Their hands shook, though not from weakness. Caleb felt one grip his shoulder, the other his bound arm. Clay whispered something so low it was almost lost. "Forgive me," Caleb answered just as low. "Live." Then they pushed him. The water took him whole. For 1 second there was no sound but the heavy closing of swamp water over his head. Warm, thick, bitter in his mouth. His bound hands dragged behind him. His feet struck something soft below and sank. He forced his knees upward, rolled, and kicked as much as the hobbles allowed. He broke the surface on his back. Air entered him in one hard pull. On the bank, Reed watched. No speech now, no final judgment. Men like Reed were brave only up to the edge. The horses turned. Hooves moved away through mud. The sounds faded by degrees. Leather creak, branch snap, a muttered curse, the wet pull of ground releasing them. Then only swamp. Caleb floated, wrists bound, ankles tied, face burning from the strike. The sky appeared in fragments through the cypress canopy. Stars broken by moss, dark on dark. Something moved nearby, not close enough to touch, close enough to understand. 2 eyes held above the waterline, still, patient. The alligator did not hate him. That mattered. It had no ledger, no grievance, no plantation law. It did not see $900. It saw disturbance. Caleb made himself quiet. Slowly, he shifted away from it. No splashing, no panic. The animal stayed where it was. He found a cypress knee with his foot, hooked one leg around it, and pulled his body toward the root. The bark cut into his skin. Good, sharp meant useful. He pressed the rope at his wrists against the edge and began to saw, back and forth, back and forth. The work was slow, painful, exact. The swamp made no promise. The rope did not give quickly. Blood slicked his hands. Mosquitoes found his face. Something brushed his calf under the water and passed on. Still, he worked, because Holloway had made one mistake. He had mistaken abandonment for certainty. He believed that once Caleb left the plantation's light, the story ended. But the story had not ended. It had only moved beyond Holloway's sight. At last, one strand loosened. Then another. The rope broke. Caleb pulled his hands forward, flexed his fingers, then bent to free the hobbles at his ankles. He stood half-balanced on the root, breathing through his nose, refusing to waste sound. Around him was nothing but black water, trees, insects, and the unseen movement of things older than any plantation. He had no food, no weapon, no dry clothes, no clear road, but he had his hands. He had his eyes. He had the details he had gathered on the way in. And now, for the first time in 9 years, he was standing in a place where Edward Holloway could not give an order and expect the world to obey. Caleb turned his head toward the faintest sound in the east. A bird call. 3 notes. A pause, 3 notes again. He listened. Then he stepped into the water and began to learn the place meant to erase him. The first night did not test Caleb's strength. It tested his attention. That distinction matters because Holloway had made his decision based on the wrong measurement. He had counted Caleb's shoulders, his arms, his years of labor, the price attached to his body in a market ledger. Holloway believed strength was the only thing a man like Caleb possessed. He was wrong. Strength carried logs. Attention kept men alive. Caleb stood on the cypress root, wrists bleeding, ankles newly freed, and listened to the swamp as if it were speaking under oath. The frogs were not noise. The insects were not noise. The water was not silence. Each sound pointed somewhere. Shallow water held one rhythm, deep water held another. Dry ground had its own small witnesses, birds, mosquitoes, the light scratch of insects moving through leaves instead of reeds. He had entered the swamp as a condemned man. Before dawn, he understood that surviving it would require a different kind of mind. Not panic, not rage, not even hope. Hope could make a man hurry. Caleb could not afford hurry. He moved one step at a time, foot forward. Test the bottom, shift weight, pause, listen. In plantation fields, speed had been forced on him. Move faster, lift more, finish before sundown. In the swamp, speed was a confession of ignorance. The careless foot sank. The careless hand reached into the wrong shadow. The careless breath became splashing, and splashing invited inspection from things that did not need a name to be dangerous. Near midnight, Caleb found the first raised patch of ground, a small hammock 6 feet across. Ferns at the edge, a cypress trunk split low enough to lean against. It was not shelter, not in any generous sense. It was only ground that did not move beneath him. That was enough. He dragged himself onto it and sat with his back against the tree. His face still throbbed where Reed had struck him. His wrists were torn open, his stomach cramped. Mosquitoes gathered at the wet places on his skin. He did not sleep at first. Sleep was surrender, and the swamp had not yet proved what it wanted from him. He watched the black water. He watched the place where the alligator had been. He watched the thin spaces between trunks where something might move. He watched until watching became less a choice than a condition of being alive. Only near dawn did his body take what it needed. When he woke, the sun had not reached the water. Gray light sat low between the trees. The swamp looked different, but not safer. Daylight did not civilize it. Daylight only revealed how much had been hidden. His hunger came sharp. There was no cornmeal, no salt pork. No pot, no cup, no hand passing him scraps from a kitchen door. The plantation had used food as another instrument of control. Here, no one controlled the ration. The fact should have felt like freedom. Instead, It felt like a question. What can you take without being taken? A frog moved at the edge of the hammock. Caleb's hand closed before thought could interfere. He held it a moment, small body kicking, slick skin, a simple living thing. Then he ate. No prayer, no ceremony, no disgust allowed to slow him. He chewed, swallowed, breathed once, and caught another. That morning, Caleb learned the first rule of the swamp. Dignity was not useful unless a man survived long enough to reclaim it. This is not a pleasant truth, but it is a necessary one. Systems of captivity often tried to strip dignity first, hoping death would follow. The swamp worked differently. It stripped illusion. It did not care what Caleb had been called. It cared whether he understood water, hunger, heat, rot, and timing. For 3 days he did not travel far. That restraint saved him. A desperate man would have tried to force his way east. A desperate man would have followed the sun, stumbled into deep water, stepped through a false bottom, grabbed a hanging vine with a snake resting beneath it, and ended as Holloway intended. Unnamed, unrecovered, folded into rumor. Caleb refused to behave like the dead man Holloway had ordered. He mapped before moving. At dawn, he watched birds. They lifted from the wet trees and traveled east in loose lines. Not all of them. Enough. Birds did not waste flight. East meant higher ground, or feeding ground, or both. At midday, he watched the alligators. They held to 3 channels where shadows stayed thick and the water deepened. They did not chase everything. They waited. Their patience had authority. At dusk, he watched the snakes. That was the hour the swamp changed. The air cooled slightly. Mosquitoes thickened. The water moccasins began to move through certain channels as if following a road older than memory. Caleb watched from the hammock, still as bark. One crossed a route 10 feet from him, heavy-bodied, dark. Its pale mouth opened once, a brief warning flash. Caleb did not move. It passed. The next evening he watched again. Same route, same hour, same route. On the 3rd evening he lowered his hand slowly toward one resting on a root arch. Not to prove courage. Courage had nothing to do with it. He needed to know the boundary between danger and disturbance. 2 fingers touched its back. The snake froze. Caleb froze with it. 5 seconds. Then he withdrew. The snake slid into the water. Caleb exhaled only after it was gone. What he learned was not that the swamp could be mastered. That would have been the same arrogance Holloway carried in polished boots. Caleb learned something harder. The swamp could be read. There is a moral line here worth marking. The men on Holloway Plantation believed domination was knowledge. They believed owning a thing meant understanding it. They believed command made them intelligent. The swamp began exposing that lie before any of them knew they were being judged. By the 5th day, Caleb found fresh water. Not much. A seep pushing cold through limestone beneath a mat of watercress. The pool was no wider than a basin. He nearly missed it. He heard it first, a small sound wrong for the stillness around it. Moving water. He pulled back the green mat and drank until his stomach hurt. Then he sat beside it for a long time. 9 years on Holloway land, and he had never controlled his own water. Every cup, every ladle, every ration had passed through someone else's authority. Here, hidden under leaves, the earth gave him what no master had. Not kindness, possibility. He marked the place in memory, not with signs. Signs could betray. Memory could travel. His shelter came slowly over the next week. Not a cabin, not a hut, nothing that would announce a man had built it. Caleb arranged the swamp rather than altering it. A reed bundle tucked where wind came through, moss packed into gaps, a shallow channel cut with a flat stone to pull rainwater away from the sleeping ground, dead branches placed to look fallen but to block sight from the east. From 20 feet, it was nothing. From 10, it was still nothing. That was the point. The plantation had taught Caleb invisibility as a defense. The swamp taught him how to turn invisibility into strategy. Food became a system. Frogs at dawn, crayfish under stones, small fish in the shallows taken by hand when the light was low and the water still, turtle eggs from a nest he did not empty. He took only enough, then covered the rest. Hunger argued for greed. Survival argued for discipline. Discipline won. Each day the plantation moved farther from his body, though not from his mind. His shoulders loosened, his walk changed. The bent caution of the quarters began to leave him, not all at once. Captivity does not disappear because a man crosses water. It lives in the posture, in the flinch, in the habit of lowering the eyes before power asks. But there was no veranda here, no ledger, no reed on horseback, no Holloway lifting a glass and calling a death sentence efficient. There was only the next sound, the next step, the next decision. On the 10th night, fever threatened. His skin burned, his stomach turned against what little he had eaten. He lay on the hammock with wet moss against his forehead, listening to insects press their endless claim against the dark. For several hours he could not stand. This is where men disappear, not in dramatic moments, not always under weapons or shouted orders. Sometimes the body simply reaches the edge of what has been demanded from it and refuses to continue. Caleb gripped the root beside him until bark cut into his palm. "No," he said, one word, barely sound, not to Holloway, not to Reed, not even to the swamp, to the part of himself that had begun calculating surrender. By morning, the fever loosened. He rose slowly, drank from the seep, and began again. By the end of the second week, Caleb knew 3 crossings through water that looked impassable. He knew where the bottom held firm beneath black surface. He knew which roots would take a man's weight and which only appeared to. He knew the false ground where mud could take a leg up to the thigh. He knew the channels that should be avoided after sunset. He also knew something else. The swamp was not only a refuge, it was a weapon waiting for the right hands. That thought did not arrive as revenge. Revenge is often loud inside a man. This was quiet, exact. It came while Caleb watched an alligator turn toward a careless splash 30 yards away. It came while he saw a snake route repeat itself for the 4th night in a row. It came while he crossed a submerged sandbar that no mounted man would find until he was already sinking beside it. Holloway had sent him into a killing place, but killing places have rules, and rules can be learned. On the 13th day, Caleb smelled smoke, not plantation smoke. Not open fire. This was thin, careful, almost hidden. The smoke of people who knew being seen could cost them everything. He crouched low and followed it for 2 hours. No haste. No sound. He moved through water and root, through curtain moss and shadow, until the voices reached him. 3 of them, low, then suddenly silent. Caleb stopped at the edge of the trees. "I'm not Reed," he said. The silence held. Then an older woman's voice answered from the dark. "Step where we can see you." Caleb stepped forward. 5 people watched him from a larger hammock, an older black woman seated on a root, a scarred man, a young mother holding an infant, and 2 teenage boys with their backs nearly touching, all of them ready to run, all of them too tired to run far. The woman studied his torn wrists, his hollowed face, his stance. "What's your name?" "Caleb." A pause. "Caleb Holloway's." He looked at her. "Was." Something changed in her eyes, not trust yet, recognition, the kind one fugitive gives another when a name has just shed its owner. "I'm Nora," she said. She held out dried fish. "Sit, eat." Caleb sat. The swamp moved around them, alive and indifferent. But now, for the first time since Reed pushed him into the water, Caleb was not alone. And the story Holloway thought he had ended began widening beyond one man. The smoke was the first proof that Caleb was not the only one the swamp had refused to surrender. It came thin through the cypress, almost invisible, broken apart by branches and wet air, not the careless smoke of a campfire. Not the open smoke of men who believed they were safe. This was controlled, starved, fed just enough to cook, then smothered before it rose too high. Caleb stopped when he smelled it. For 13 days, the swamp had taught him that nothing living survived by accident. A fire like that meant discipline. It meant fear. It meant people. He crouched low behind a root and waited. No voices at first. Only insects, water, a bird call from the east. Then, after several minutes, he heard them. 3 voices, low, careful. The conversation cut off the instant he shifted his weight. That silence told him more than the voices had. These were not hunters. Hunters would call out. Patrolmen would threaten. White men from Holloway's property would curse and advance with weapons raised. These people went silent in the trained way of those who had spent their lives surviving other people's footsteps. Caleb stood at the edge of the trees. "I'm not Reed," he said. No answer. "I'm not Holloway's man." Still nothing. The swamp held the pause for them. Somewhere behind him, something slid from a root into water. Then a woman's voice came from the hammock ahead. "Step where we can see you." Caleb stepped forward slowly, hands open. There were 5 of them. The woman who had spoken sat on a raised cypress root, older, thin, and still in the way only dangerous survivors are still. Her hair was wrapped in faded cloth. Her face carried lines that did not soften her. They recorded weather, hunger, pursuit, and decisions made without time to grieve. Beside her stood a black man in his 50s, with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. He held a sharpened stick in one hand, not raised, but ready. A young woman sat near the center of the hammock, an infant pressed against her chest. The child slept with one fist buried in the fabric of her dress. The mother's eyes stayed on Caleb's hands. 2 teenage boys sat back to back. One looked directly at Caleb. The other watched the water behind him. That arrangement was not random. It was defense. One front, one rear. One old woman measuring, one mother protecting, one wounded man prepared to spend what little strength he had left. This was not a camp. It was a verdict on the world that had chased them here. The woman studied Caleb's torn wrists, his mud-black clothes, his hollow face. She saw the plantation on him, but she also saw something else. The change the swamp had begun. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb." A pause. "Caleb who?" He almost said Holloway. Habit rose before thought. That was how ownership entered the mouth. It trained the tongue to repeat the lie. He swallowed it. "Caleb," he said again, "was Holloway's." The older woman looked at him for a long moment. That answer mattered, not because it changed the law. The law would still call him property. The patrols would still call him stolen. The newspapers would still call him runaway. But the swamp did not enforce their language, and neither did this woman. "I'm Nora," she said. She lowered the sharpened reed beside her. "Sit down, eat something." She handed him dried fish. Caleb took it and sat on the root opposite her. He did not thank her in a large way. Gratitude could be dangerous among people who had nothing to spare. He simply ate and gave the silence respect. The scarred man kept watching him. "How long you been out here?" Nora asked. 13 days. The teenage boy looking at the water turned slightly. 13, Caleb nodded. The scarred man gave a short breath, not quite disbelief, not quite approval. "Most don't last 3, he said. That was not exaggeration. It was field knowledge. The swamp did not need chains to hold a man. It used hunger, fever, wrong turns, bad water, snakes, deep channels, and panic. The plantation sent people there because the plantation knew what it did to the unprepared. Nora leaned forward. "Reed bring you?" Caleb looked at her. "Holloway ordered it." Reed carried it. The young mother's mouth tightened at Holloway's name. The scarred man looked away. The boys heard the name as if it belonged to a sickness spreading through air. This is the part that must be stated plainly. Holloway's violence did not end at his fence line. His name had traveled into hiding places, into wet ground, into the mouths of people who had fled him and still measured distance by his reach. Nora asked, "Why?" Caleb finished the piece of fish. "I stopped Reed from beating a boy." No one asked if the boy had deserved it. That question belonged to people who still believe punishment on a plantation needed a reason. The young mother shifted the infant against her shoulder. "What boy?" "Caleb Jr." Nora's eyes sharpened. 16? "Yes." "He's still there?" Caleb did not answer immediately. The answer was too large for one word. "Yes," he said at last. Nora looked down at her hands. There are silences that are empty, and there are silences crowded with names. This one was crowded. Caleb counted the faces around the small fire pit. 5 who had made it out, 5 who had not yet made it anywhere safe, 5 lives hidden on a patch of raised ground, while 43 more remained under Holloway's roof, bell, whip, ledger, and gun. "How long have you been here?" Caleb asked. 6 weeks, Nora said. "Long enough to know where they won't follow." "Past the second cypress break." She nodded. "They come to the edge sometimes. They shout. Fire a shot into the trees, then they turn back. Men like that don't trust water they can't see through." The scarred man spoke. "They trust dogs." "Dogs lose the trail in deep water," Caleb said. The man looked at him then with new interest. "You know that? I watched tracks vanish near the North Channel, heard hounds circle for half an hour 2 nights ago." Nora studied him more closely. "You've been mapping." Caleb did not deny it. 3 crossings south of here, 1 clean water seep west of the split cypress, 2 sinkholes near the eastern approach, deep Gator Channel north by northwest. Moccasin route runs from the split trunk toward the submerged log at dusk. The 2 boys stopped pretending not to listen. Nora's face changed by degrees, not surprise. "Calculation. You found all that in 13 days?" "I had reason." The scarred man lowered himself onto the ground. "You either got God with you, or death got tired of looking." Caleb looked toward the black water. "Neither. I listened." That was the answer the plantation would never have understood. Holloway listened only to profit. Reed listened only to fear. Men like them mistook obedience for truth. Caleb had entered the swamp with nothing, and because he had nothing, he had been forced to hear everything. Nora pointed to the water with her chin. "There's a 4th crossing northeast. We thought about looking. Snake's heavy that way." "There is a crossing," Caleb said. "Runs close to the Moccasin Channel. People stop looking when they see the snakes. But there's firm bottom under the left root line, narrow, good enough for 1 person at a time." Nora sat back. For the first time, the scarred man's grip loosened on the stick. The young mother asked, "Can it take a child?" Caleb looked at the infant. "Yes, if carried high." Her eyes lowered, not in relief exactly, but because relief was too expensive to spend early. Nora waited until the others settled. Then she asked the question she had already answered for herself. "You're going back." Caleb looked east. The plantation lay somewhere beyond the water, beyond pine and mud, beyond the strip of ground Holloway believed separated the living from the discarded. Caleb could not see it, but he knew its sounds. The bell before dawn, the dogs, the work calls. Reed's horse, children holding breath in cabins after dark. "Yes," he said. The scarred man shook his head. "You get out and you walk back in. There are 43 still there." "There were 43 when you were there before," he said. "You couldn't get them out then." "No." Caleb's voice stayed flat. "I didn't know the swamp then." That answer settled over the hammock. Nora watched him in the firelight. The fire was low, nearly ash. She had kept it that way. The orange light touched her cheekbones and left her eyes dark. "You thinking revenge?" she asked. Caleb did not rush the answer. Revenge would have been understandable. Any moral account that denies that is dishonest. A man bound and thrown into black water has earned the right to anger, but anger alone could get people killed. Caleb had learned that in the swamp, too. Loud things drew predators. "I'm thinking roots," he said. Patrols, timing, who can walk, who has to be carried, where dogs lose scent, where armed men sink if they don't know the bottom. Nora's gaze did not leave him. "And Holloway?" Caleb's jaw tightened once. "Holloway will follow what he thinks belongs to him." No one corrected the word. They all understood. The lie of ownership had real consequences, even when spoken by the enemy. The younger of the two boys finally spoke. "What if they don't come?" Caleb looked at him. "They will." "Why?" "Because men like Holloway can survive losing money. They cannot survive being seen as powerless." That was the accusation at the heart of it. The pursuit would not only be about labor. It would be about restoring fear. Holloway would need the whole plantation and every neighboring planter to know that no one could walk away from him and remain unpunished. Nora nodded slowly. "You understand him." "I understand what he serves." The distinction mattered. Holloway was not merely one cruel man. He was a local expression of a wider machine, court-backed, market-fed, pulpit-excused, and patrol-enforced. To treat him as an isolated monster would be too easy. It would let too many respectable hands go clean. The scarred man asked, "When?" "Not yet." Caleb picked up a flat stone and turned it once in his hand. "I need 7 more days." "For what?" "To learn what I missed." Nora's eyes narrowed. Caleb continued, "I need to know how the snakes move after rain, how the Gator Channel changes at dawn, which route can carry a bad knee, where 43 people can stand without sinking, where the dogs will lose certainty, where Holloway's men will believe they still have a path." The young mother held her child tighter. "You think you can bring all of them here?" "No," Caleb said. That word struck the group cold. Then he looked north. "Not here, through here." Nora followed his gaze. Beyond the hammock, beyond the mapped water, beyond everything they had survived so far, the swamp continued into darkness, not safety, but passage. "North?" she asked. "Yes," the scarred man gave a low laugh. "That's a long walk." "So was dying," Caleb said. No one laughed after that. Night deepened. The fire collapsed inward. The swamp carried on around them, indifferent and alive. The two boys lay down back to back. The young mother fed the infant under a cloth. The scarred man kept watch facing east. Nora remained seated across from Caleb. "You know what you're asking those people to do?" she said quietly. "Yes. To step into the one place they've been told means death." "Yes. To trust a man they watched get taken away." Caleb looked at his wrists. The wounds had begun to close, badly. "They don't have to trust what I say. They have to follow where I step." Nora held his answer for a while. Then she reached beside her and handed him another piece of dried fish. "Then eat," she said. "A man leading 43 people through black water better not fall first." Caleb took it. There was no ceremony in the moment. No promise spoken over the fire. No grand oath. Only food passed from one fugitive to another, and a plan beginning to take shape in a place Holloway had chosen for disappearance. That is how history often turns. Not with trumpets. Not with permission, but with a black woman named Nora keeping a fire low, a black man named Caleb learning the enemy's blind spots, and a swamp full of dangers slowly becoming a road. For 7 more days, Caleb learned the swamp with the patience of a man preparing evidence. He learned where the water rose after rain and where it lied about depth. He learned which roots would hold a child's weight, which could carry a full-grown man, and which cracked under pressure with no warning at all. He learned how far sound traveled across black water at night. He learned where a whisper died and where a snapped branch could be heard 50 yards away. Nora watched him work. She did not ask many questions. She understood the shape of a plan before anyone named it. A woman like Nora had survived too long to confuse silence with absence. Caleb was not hiding from Holloway anymore. He was measuring him. On the 20th evening, Caleb sat at the edge of the hammock and looked east, beyond the cypress, beyond the pine ridge, beyond the fields. Holloway Plantation waited under its own false peace. 43 people still rose to its bell, bent under its orders, slept inside cabins watched by men who believed fear was permanent. Caleb picked up a flat stone and turned it in his hand. "Tomorrow," he said. Nora did not look surprised. "How many still there?" 43, she said. "Last I knew." He held the number a moment, not as a statistic, not as a dramatic count, as an obligation. "Then no one gets left behind." That sentence was not heroic, it was logistical. It meant children, elders, injuries, bad knees, fear, hesitation, distance, water, dogs, gun, and sunrise. It meant that if one person failed to move, the whole line could fail. It meant planning for the weakest body, not the strongest. That is a moral fact worth preserving. Freedom movements are often remembered through the boldest figure at the front, but they succeed only when someone plans for the slowest person in the dark. Before dawn, Caleb left the hammock. Nora pressed dried fish into his hand. He tried to refuse it. She closed his fingers around it. "Don't waste strength arguing with me." He took it. The two boys, Marcus and Eli, stood nearby, awake and silent. Marcus gave one short nod. Eli looked away toward the water. One boy wanted to believe, the other was afraid to. Caleb did not fault either of them. Fear was not cowardice. Fear was information. The question was what a person did after receiving it. Caleb moved east through the swamp. He no longer guessed. He knew. Left at the split cypress, across the submerged sandbar, weight forward, feet wide. Stop before the moccasin channel. Listen, cross only when the water settled. Pass behind the dead tupelo where limestone lay under the surface like a hidden floor. Every step had been rehearsed in his body. At the ridge, he stopped among the pines. The air was drier there. It smelled of needles, wood smoke, and distant fields. The plantation lay a mile and a half ahead. Small lights marked the overseer's rounds. The quarters were dark. The big house stood higher than everything else, pale against the last part of night. Caleb waited, not from doubt, from discipline. Then he moved toward the cabins. He entered the quarter before the 3 o'clock bell. That hour belonged to the most exhausted silence, when even grief seemed too tired to breathe. The cabins stood in rows, low and dark. No one spoke. No one sang. Nothing moved except the smoke thinning from dying coals. The plantation called this order. It was not order. It was human life trained to make itself small. Caleb went to the third cabin on the left and knocked twice, paused. Then once more. Inside, boards creaked, carefully avoided, and then betrayed. Someone came to the door. It opened 3 inches. Caleb Jr.'s face appeared in the gap. For a moment, the boy did not breathe. "They said you were dead." They were wrong. Junior stared at him as if the swamp itself had taken human shape. "Let me in," Caleb said. The door opened. 4 people were inside. Junior Moses, old enough to have worked Holloway iron for 30 years and still not old enough to rest. Celia, who cooked in the main house and knew more secrets than Holloway would ever suspect. Grace, 17, standing near the back wall with her arms close to her sides and her eyes fixed on Caleb. No one rushed to embrace him. That would come from a different kind of life. Here, even joy had to check the windows first. Caleb sat on the floor. "I don't have long." Moses leaned forward, his face hard with disbelief. Boy, you walk in here after 20 days like you came back from Sunday service. I came from the swamp. That's what I mean. Celia looked at his wrists. The wounds were scabbed, dark, ugly. Reed did that. Reed carried out the order. Holloway gave it. The room tightened at Holloway's name. That was the correct reaction, not surprise, recognition. Caleb looked at each of them. I need 3 things. Patrol routes, weapons, and who among the 43 can walk? Moses gave a low, bitter sound. You planning to run the whole quarter? Yes. The word sat in the room like a lit coal. Junior looked at the door. Celia closed her eyes once. Grace did not move. Moses shook his head. They will burn us for trying. They will punish you for breathing if it teaches someone else to breathe without permission. Moses looked up sharply. Caleb's voice did not rise. I am not asking because it is safe. I am asking because the door is open for one night only. That was the evidence, not hope. A window, a narrow one. History often gives the oppressed no clean choice between danger and safety. It gives a choice between 2 dangers, and then later, comfortable people judge the decision from chairs. Moses rubbed both hands over his knees. The east fence has 2 men. They trade every 40 minutes. North side is usually Reed, if he is sober enough to care. South fence has old Carter. He sleeps after midnight more often than he stands. Main house weapons? Celia answered before Moses could. 2 rifles above the parlor fireplace. Holloway keeps a pistol after dark. Reed has his knife. The hired hands keep firearms in the south bunkhouse. Caleb nodded. Dogs? 2 bloodhounds, Junior said, fed near the stable. Reed takes them when someone runs. Grace spoke for the first time. Dogs follow ground, not water. Caleb turned toward her. She held his gaze. I heard old Isaac say it once, before he disappeared. A pause. What else did Isaac say? That men who don't know a swamp die loud in it. The room went still. Moses looked at Caleb again, and now he was not looking at a returned man. He was looking at a possible route. You know the way? Every step we need. You sure? No. That answer landed harder because it was honest. Caleb continued. But I know more than they do, and in that water that is the difference. Celia moved closer to the small hearth, thinking. Who can walk? Caleb asked. Most, she said. Moses has the bad knee. Aunt Ruth can walk if someone steadies her. 2 babies must be carried. Little Thomas coughs at night, but his mother can keep cloth over his mouth. Jacob's foot is swollen. He can move slow. Slow is fine. Stopping is not. Grace nodded once, as if recording an order. I can tell them. Celia turned to her. No. Grace did not look away from Caleb. I know which cabins listen. I know which ones panic. I know who needs warning and who needs a hand on the shoulder. Celia's face tightened, but she said nothing. Mothers often recognize courage in their children before they are ready to approve it. Caleb studied Grace. She had the eyes of someone who had spent years collecting facts, while others mistook her silence for emptiness. You tell them only this, he said. Bring nothing that makes noise, no pots, no tools unless wrapped, no lanterns, children carried. Follow the person in front, step where I step. Do not speak unless someone falls. Grace repeated it once under her breath. Then she asked, when? Tomorrow night. Junior's face changed. That soon? That late? No one argued. Outside, a horse shifted near the far fence. Everyone in the cabin froze. The sound passed. A man coughed in another cabin. The night settled again. Caleb stood. Moses caught his wrist gently before he reached the door. What happened to you out there? Caleb looked down at the old man's hand. For a moment he saw the swamp as it had been on the first night. black water, bound wrists, eyes above the surface. Then he saw it as it was now, crossings, channels, routes, warnings, a road no white patrol had the humility to read. I learned Holloway does not own everything he points at. Moses let go. Caleb slipped back into the dark. He did not return directly to the swamp. For 3 hours before dawn, he worked the route between the plantation's western fence and the cypress edge. He opened a gap low enough to crawl through and covered it again from sight. He marked the safe line with signs that looked like accident. 3 stones near a root, a broken reed at knee height, moss scraped from the north side of a trunk. Nothing obvious. Obvious signs kill people. By first light, he was gone. The plantation woke to its bell, its smoke, its orders, its same brutal confidence. Holloway stood on his veranda, unaware that the man he had thrown into the swamp had walked through his quarter, counted his weapons, mapped his patrols, and left with the names of everyone still breathing under his roof. That is the indictment. The plantation had men, guns, dogs, money, law, and habit. Caleb had memory, water, silence, and 43 reasons to return. The night chosen for the escape did not announce itself. No storm covered them. No wind rose to hide footsteps. No mercy came from the sky. The moon was thin, the air heavy, and Holloway Plantation settled into darkness with the same confidence it had carried for years. The big house went quiet first. Then the overseer's quarters. Then the bunkhouse. Last came the slave cabins, where sleep was never full sleep, only a temporary lowering of the body while fear kept watch. Caleb waited at the western fence. He stood where the shadow of the pine line met the last strip of cleared earth. Behind him, the swamp waited in black silence. Ahead of him, the quarters held 43 lives that Holloway still believed would rise at his bell before sunrise. That belief was already dead. Grace moved first. She did not run from cabin to cabin. She did not whisper more than needed. She touched doors, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. The signal traveled without becoming sound. Inside each cabin, people woke into terror before they woke into understanding. A woman opened her door with a child against her chest. Grace put a finger to her lips. Now. That was all. No speeches, no explanation repeated. Explanation had already been given in fragments over the previous day. Bring nothing loud, carry the children, help the old, follow the line, do not stop. The plantation had spent years teaching these people to move when ordered. That night they moved without an order from any white mouth. One by one they came out. A mother with a sleeping infant wrapped tight against her shoulder. A boy holding his sister's hand. 2 men supporting Aunt Ruth between them. Jacob limping with his swollen foot wrapped in cloth. Moses stepping carefully, his bad knees stiff, his face set like iron left too long in fire. Celia moving near the center, counting children with her eyes. Junior near the rear, trying to make himself useful, trying not to look afraid. Fear was everywhere. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Freedom did not erase fear. It gave fear a direction. Caleb watched them cross the yard in low shadows. 43 people moving through the very space that had been designed to expose them. The open ground between the cabins and the western fence suddenly looked enormous. Every step seemed too loud. Every breath seemed capable of betrayal. Far off, a horse shifted near the stable. The line froze. No one spoke. A guard coughed from the south fence, then settled again into sleep or boredom. The sound passed. Caleb lifted one hand. Move. They moved. At the fence, Caleb had opened the gap low near the ground, where darkness gathered under the rails. Each person had to crouch, crawl, or be helped through. It slowed them. Slowness was dangerous, but noise was worse. Caleb counted every face. 1, 2, 7, 12. A child began to whimper. His mother pressed his face gently against her neck and rocked once, not enough to delay the line, just enough to anchor him. 15, 21. Moses reached the gap and stopped, jaw tight. His knee would not bend easily. Caleb crouched beside him, hands on my shoulders. Moses looked at the opening. I can make it. I know, hands on my shoulders. There was no pride in that moment large enough to waste time on. Moses obeyed. Caleb took his weight, shifted him low, and pulled him through 30, 36. Grace came through near the end. Cabins are clear, she whispered. Caleb did not accept it until he saw for himself. Everyone, everyone. He counted again, 40, 41, 42. Junior came last, leading a small boy whose eyes were open but unfocused with sleep. Caleb pulled them through. 43. The number had weight now, not rumor. Not memory, not plantation inventory. 43 breathing people standing in the dark beyond Holloway's fence. Caleb replaced the brush behind them. No sign. No broken rail visible. No obvious trail for the first eyes that would come at dawn. Then he turned west. The tree line waited. Beyond it, the swamp. Some in the group saw only death there. That was what they had been taught to see. Cypress water, moccasins, mud. Fever, darkness, the place where men vanished when owners wanted no questions. Caleb stepped into the trees first. No one followed for half a second. That half second could have destroyed them. Then Grace moved, then Celia, then Moses, then the mothers. Then the rest. The plantation disappeared behind them, branch by branch. The first stretch through pine was hard enough. Roots caught ankles, needles hid uneven ground. No lanterns were allowed. Caleb had marked the path with signs that belonged to darkness. A stone out of place, a scraped trunk, a reed bent low. He did not need to see them clearly. He had made them for his hands and feet as much as his eyes. At the edge of the swamp, the line stopped again. This was the real threshold. The water lay black under the cypress, still as a sealed mouth. The smell rose thick from it. Warm rot, mud. Green life. Something moved far off and then went quiet. Aunt Ruth whispered a prayer. A boy said, "I can't." Caleb turned. His voice was low. "You can. Step where I step. Trust the bottom. Do not trust what it looks like." That was more than instruction. It was the lesson of the entire night. The plantation looked permanent. Holloway looked powerful. The swamp looked like death. Each appearance concealed a different truth. Caleb stepped into the water. It reached his shin, then his knee. He placed his foot wide, weight forward, exactly as he had practiced. He waited until the person behind him entered. Celia came first, carrying a child high against her chest. The child's eyes widened. "Quiet," she breathed. Behind her, the line entered. One by one, the 43 walked into the water. This is where Holloway's world began to fail. Bloodhounds could read dirt. They could read sweat on grass, broken weeds, human passage through dust. But here, scent broke apart. Footprints vanished. The same water that Holloway had chosen as a grave now erased the evidence of escape. Caleb led them through the first crossing. Left of the split cypress, diagonal over the hidden sandbar, feet wide, no splashing, the water deepened near the center. A woman gasped as mud pulled at her leg. Grace reached back and caught her wrist. "Forward," Caleb said. "Not up. Forward." The woman leaned, shifted, and came free. The line held. That mattered. Once fear breaks a line, it travels faster than sound. Caleb never allowed panic to become public. He moved back when needed, touched an arm, steadied a shoulder, corrected a step. Not with softness, with certainty. They reached the limestone shelf behind the dead tupelo. There the water lowered. Moses nearly stumbled. Junior caught him from one side. Caleb took the other. "I told you I could make it," Moses whispered. "You are making it," Caleb said. No more was needed. Behind them, the plantation remained dark. Holloway still slept. Reed, if he slept at all, slept in a world where Caleb was dead and 43 people were contained. That ignorance was part of the indictment. Men who build their power on surveillance often fail to notice what they have never believed possible. Holloway watched for rebellion as noise. He did not understand discipline. He watched for fire. He did not understand water. Halfway through the swamp, Caleb raised his hand. The line stopped instantly. 43 people stood in black water without a word. He listened. A night bird called once from the north. Insects pressed around them. Something large moved in a deep channel far off, then settled. No pursuit. Not yet. He lowered his hand. They moved again. Time changed in the swamp. Minutes stretched. Distance could not be measured honestly by steps. The slowest person set the speed. That was Moses for part of the route, then Jacob, then one mother whose arms shook from carrying her child. Caleb shifted people without discussion. Stronger hands took bundles. Older children held younger ones. Grace moved along the line like a quiet command, touching shoulders, correcting gaps. Keep close. Keep moving. Do not speak. Near the moccasin channel, Caleb turned them south, then west, avoiding the route he had watched for days. The water there appeared no different from the rest. That was the danger. The swamp did not label its warnings for strangers. He stopped Junior with one hand before the boy placed a foot wrong. Not there. Junior pulled back. His face tightened when something moved across the water ahead. Caleb did not explain. Explanation could wait until survival had room for it. They crossed behind the route line, one at a time, narrow, slow, necessary. By then, exhaustion had begun to loosen the group. Shoulders sagged, feet dragged. The infants slept and woke and slept again. The oldest breathed hard through their noses. Nobody asked how far remained. That question could weaken people faster than distance itself. Finally, the ground rose. Not much. 6 inches. Then a foot. Then enough for roots to show above water. Nora's hammock appeared out of the dark. Marcus and Eli were waiting at the edge. They pulled the first children up, then the mothers, then Aunt Ruth, then Jacob, then Moses. Nora stood near the center of the raised ground, directing without raising her voice. Children here, elders there, no one near the edge. Sit close. The hammock was too small for 48 people. They made it hold them anyway, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, children in the center, adults around them. Those who could stand remained standing. Those who could not sat in mud, roots, and ferns as if they had reached a palace. Caleb counted again. Nora watched him do it. 43 from the plantation, 5 from the swamp. 48 alive. Only then did he allow himself to breathe differently. Grace came beside him at the eastern edge. Everyone is here. I know. What happens now? Caleb looked toward the direction of Holloway Plantation. The first light had not yet come. But it would. The cook fires would not start. The quarters would not answer the bell. The cabins would open empty. Holloway's private order would collapse in front of every man he had paid to enforce it. We wait, Caleb said. Grace followed his gaze. For them, for him. The moral weight of that answer was cold and simple. Caleb had not merely led 43 people away. He had forced Holloway to enter a world where his name, money, dogs, and guns would mean less than knowing where to place one foot. Behind them, the freed people sat in silence. Not the silence of the plantation, not the silence of being watched. This silence was different, fragile, stunned, unfinished. The silence of people who had crossed into danger and found for the moment that danger had not betrayed them. The eastern sky began to pale. Soon Holloway would wake. Soon the shouting would begin. Caleb stood at the edge of the hammock, listening to the first birds call through the cypress, and prepared to let the swamp answer. At sunrise, Holloway Plantation discovered the truth. Not slowly, not gently, all at once. the cook fires did not start. No smoke rose from the quarters. No children moved between cabins. No old voices coughed awake in the dark. The bell rang and the cabins answered with nothing. That silence was the first public failure of Edward Holloway's rule. For years he had mistaken fear for loyalty. He had mistaken exhaustion for obedience. He had mistaken locked routines for consent. That morning, every empty doorway testified against him. A guard found the first cabin vacant. Then the second, then the third. By the time he reached the western row, he was running. Holloway came out onto the veranda in his shirt sleeves, silver hair uncombed, pistol already in his hand. Thomas Reed was gone by then, claimed days earlier by the swamp he had trusted only from horseback. That absence mattered. Holloway had lost his favorite instrument before he understood the music had changed. "What do you mean, gone?" Holloway said. The guard did not answer well. Men who enforce terror rarely speak clearly when terror turns around and faces them. "All of them, sir." Holloway walked to the quarter himself. He entered the first cabin, empty bedding, cold ash, a wooden cup left on its side. Nothing stolen, nothing scattered, nothing burning, not panic, procedure. That was what enraged him. Had they fled in chaos, he could have called them foolish. Had they left signs of confusion, he could have comforted himself with contempt. But they had left cleanly, quietly, together. 43 people had passed through his property like a judgment. At the western fence, they found the gap, low, hidden, covered from sight. Holloway stared at it for a long time. This was not escape as he understood it. This was organization, planning, knowledge moving beneath his notice. Someone had walked through the plantation's blind spots and used them. Then one of the men said what Holloway had already begun to fear. "Could be Caleb." No one spoke after that. The dead man had returned. Holloway ordered the dogs brought out. 2 bloodhounds were led from the stable, eager at first, noses down, pulling hard toward the fence. Men with rifles followed, 3 hired hands newly arrived from town, 1 remaining plantation guard, and Holloway himself. He would not send others alone. Not now, not after Reed, not after the swamp had begun taking men he had paid to be brave. That is another truth worth recording. Power often calls itself courage until it is forced to step into uncertainty. The dogs reached the tree line and found the trail. For a while, they moved fast, too fast. Caleb heard them from the hammock before he saw them. First, the distant shouts. Then, the broken commands. Then, the high, eager sound of hounds, believing the world still made sense. The 48 people on the raised ground did not move. Nora sat with the infant in her lap. Celia held 2 children close against her sides. Moses leaned on a root, jaw tight, bad knee swollen from the crossing. Grace stood near Caleb, eyes fixed east. "They're coming," she said. "Yes." "Do we run?" "No." Caleb listened. The dogs hit the water at the eastern edge. Their voices changed immediately. Confusion has a sound. So does authority when it loses the ground beneath it. The hounds circled, crossed, doubled back, splashed through scent that no longer held. The water had taken the trail apart. Holloway shouted at the handlers. The handlers shouted at the dogs. The dogs answered with failure. Caleb did not smile. This was not triumph yet. It was only the first correction. Holloway entered the swamp. Of course he did. Men like Holloway do not stop at the edge because they have spent their lives being told every edge will open for them. He stepped into black water with his pistol raised and his boots sinking, still believing command could substitute for knowledge. The hired men followed. They came in loud, rifles held high, legs forcing through mud, branches breaking, dogs dragging and slipping. Every movement announced them to the swamp. Caleb had expected this. He had counted on it. The first man found the false bottom near the limestone collapse. 1 step held, The next did not. He dropped hard into mud up to his waist, then his chest. He shouted. Another man grabbed for him, and the second man sank almost as deep. Their rifles went sideways. Water splashed. Dogs pulled back. No one died. That distinction matters. Caleb had not set out to become what Holloway was. He had arranged delay, fear, exposure. He had arranged consequences. There is a moral difference between defense and cruelty, and history must not blur it for the convenience of easy storytelling. The men clawed out, filthy and shaken. Holloway kept moving. The next trap was not made of Caleb's hands. It belonged to the swamp itself. Caleb had only learned its schedule. The moccasin channel lay where careless men would choose to cross, because the surface there looked open. Two hired hands pushed through it in a rush, watching the hammock ahead instead of the water around their knees. Then their voices broke, not from bravery, not from command, from sudden knowledge. They stumbled back toward shallower ground, shouting for help, striking at the water with rifle barrels, no longer hunters, no longer agents of Holloway's will, just frightened men in a place they had not respected enough to understand. That was the swamp's testimony. Holloway found himself alone in the forward channel. 30 yards from the hammock, water at his knees, pistol in hand, nothing clear to shoot. Caleb stepped out from behind the cypress root. For a moment, the plantation and the swamp faced each other through two men. Holloway saw him. The silence that followed was larger than the distance between them. Caleb stood barefoot in black water, clothes torn, wrists scarred, face changed by 20 days of survival. He was not the man Reed had pushed from the bank. Holloway understood that, even if he had no language for it. "You," Holloway said. Caleb's voice carried clean across the water. $900. Holloway's hand tightened around the pistol. "That is what you said I was worth." The pistol rose. Grace held her breath behind him. Moses shifted as if to step forward. Nora stopped him with one look. Caleb did not move. "You threw me in this water with my hands tied," he said. "You thought the swamp would finish your work." Holloway aimed at him, but he did not fire. That hesitation deserves attention. It was not mercy. It was not conscience. It was calculation collapsing. Holloway had a pistol, but no control. Men behind him were hurt. Dogs were useless. The 43 were beyond his reach. The swamp had stripped his power down to one weapon and an audience that no longer believed in him. "You cannot go back," Holloway said. "I know. They will hunt you. I know. You will never be safe." Caleb looked at him without flinching. "Neither will you." The words were not a threat in the ordinary sense. They were a diagnosis. From that morning forward, Holloway would live with the knowledge that every bell could fail, every worker could remember, every swamp line could hide a road, and every man priced in a ledger could be carrying a map inside his head. Caleb pointed east. "Go home, Mr. Holloway, whatever home means after this." The pistol stayed raised for several seconds. Then slowly, Holloway lowered it. Not surrender. A man like him would never give the dignity of surrender to those he had wronged. But his arm had run out of purpose. His authority had reached water it could not cross. He turned back. He moved east, stumbling once where he had walked in proudly. His men followed as best they could. The dogs went quiet. Caleb watched until the cypress swallowed them. Only then did he turn back to the hammock. 48 people looked at him. No one cheered. That would come from a simpler story. These people were tired, soaked, hunted, and not yet free in any legal sense. But something had changed that no law could fully measure. Moses stood with his bad knee bent under him. Grace's chin was lifted. Junior stared at Caleb as if trying to understand how a man could return from being erased. Nora spoke first. "North?" Caleb nodded. "North." They moved before the day grew hot. Children in the center, elders supported. those strongest at the edges. Caleb led through the upper channels, away from Holloway's reach, away from known patrol routes, away from the plantation's dead geography. For 17 days, they traveled through swamp, forest, and river country. At night, they moved. By day, they hid. Caleb chose water when dogs might follow, high ground when children needed rest. He rationed food. Nora kept order. Grace carried messages down the line. Moses walked through pain and refused to be carried until he fell once, then accepted help without shame. Not one person was lost. That is the fact that should remain after the darkness. Not one. By the time they crossed into safer routes, Caleb had become more than a fugitive. He had become a passage, a man who knew how to turn danger into direction. 20 years later, in 1879, stories still moved through Florida's swamp country about a black guide named Caleb who could lead people through water no patrol could map. Slave catchers tried to learn the route for years and failed because they came with guns, dogs, and certainty. The swamp did not give its secrets to certainty. It gave them to those who listened. And that is why Caleb's story must be remembered without softness. Holloway did not lose 43 people because of luck. He lost them because the people he treated as property studied him more carefully than he ever studied them. He lost them because cruelty creates witnesses. He lost them because a man he threw away came back with the road. Subscribe if you believe stories like Caleb's should not stay buried under polite history. Comment your location below and tell us your theory. Did Holloway walk out of that swamp merely defeated, or did he leave something behind in the black water that never returned with him?